This term white noising, this is one of those terms that my image of this term is that there's people that basically say that passive immersion is just a waste of time. And they use the word white noising to kind of like make fun of people that think they're getting benefits from doing passive immersion because they're just like filling the background with white noise and expecting it to help them make language learning gains. And so that I always, I thought itself was silly because obviously I think that passive immersion can be really beneficial if you do it in the right way. But if you reframe it as like basically you're just listening to uncomprehensible content and not even really paying attention to it, then I think it makes sense to use the word white noise because that's basically what it is, right? It's like the language might be entering your ears and existing in your environment, but it might as well be white noise to you if it's not comprehensible and you're not paying attention. But this question in particular was, is there a real distinction between actively listening or mindfully listening to content that's not comprehensible to you, or at least largely not comprehensible to you, and then truly white noising? I guess you could kind of make a four-way matrix where you have like, it's all passive immersion, but there's like, you're somewhat paying attention to it versus you're really just ignoring it. So it's more like background immersion versus it's comprehensible to you versus not comprehensible to you. In terms of the level of attention you're paying, I think it's good to make that distinction between passive immersion and background immersion. Because background immersion is when you're truly treating it like white noise. Like it's pretty much completely fallen into the background of your consciousness. And then passive is like, it's kind of going in and out, but it's mostly at least on the screen of consciousness. And then the other axis would be comprehensible versus not comprehensible. And then we were going to rank them. Obviously, comprehensible and true, like passive, like you're paying attention to it. That's, I think, very beneficial. There's kind of like a blurry boundary between when it stops being active and when it becomes passive. But at least like for the moments where you're paying attention to it, it's like little brief moments of basically like full quality immersion. And then the next would probably be you're still actively paying attention to it, but it's not comprehensible. We've kind of become more aware of this over time, but comprehensibility is really important. So even if you're like sitting and you're really paying attention to it, which again, it's hard to pay attention to it in a natural way when you don't understand, because it just sounds like noise, but it can still happen, right? You can just be listening to the sound of the language, see what words your brain picks out. And if you're doing this, I still think that there's a lot that you're going to learn. It's very rare for something to be truly 0% comprehensible to you, right? There's going to be some words that your brain can pick out, but it is going to be more limited. And then we have background immersion. We could probably lump both of the background immersion types into white noising, which is that you're ignoring it. There's the type that you're ignoring it, but if you paid attention, then you would understand it. You could argue that that's probably the one that still has maybe some small amount of utility because maybe there's brief moments where you end up paying attention to it, or maybe even there's some part of your mind that's like truly unconscious that is still absorbing these patterns. Like they're still entering your ears and getting processed by your brain to some degree. And then the least effective one would be not comprehensible and it's completely, you're ignoring in the background. I think that is true white noising, and that even then there might be some marginal benefit to that. There probably is. Like, there's probably some part of your brain that's still just doing raw statistical analysis on patterns in the phonetics and things like that. It's probably not literally zero, especially if there's other times where you're doing true active immersion. So your brain views the language as something that it cares about and that it's trying to acquire. But yeah, it's still very, very limited. So yeah, I would say that like, if I was going to rate like how beneficial these are, passive immersion where you're paying attention and it's comprehensible, that's like 8 out of 10. Compared to like active immersion. If it's not comprehensible and you're paying attention to it, I would rate that as like 5 out of 10. If you're not paying attention to it, but it's still comprehensible, maybe that's like 2 out of 10. And if it's not comprehensible and you're not paying attention to it, that's probably like 1 out of 10. That's kind of like how I feel. So yeah, I think that there's definitely distinctions between these combinations.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more kind of like factor I think to consider with the idea of white noising. It was a like psychology paper I read a while ago. I didn't post it, but it was research related to your brain reinforces like filtering or ignoring information in the same way it reinforces like learning something. And it was like a really
Hmm.
interesting experiment where it was like it had to do with when you're driving and things are on the side of the road. They found that areas where people drove past more often, they saw less that was on the side of the road. Like
Hmm.
they would put like objects in places people went every day, and people who didn't go there every day would see them, but the people who went there every day wouldn't see them. And that made me
Hmm.
think, could there be an issue with white noise, like true white noising, where you're not paying any attention, it's just noise? Could you be reinforcing your brain to filter out and ignore Japanese? If you're like totally doing something else in English and you just have Japanese or whatever your target language just playing
Yeah.
and you're
Yeah.
completely ignoring it, it could that maybe have a downside?
That's a really interesting point. And I've heard people made that argument, but this is the first time that it actually was kind of compelling to me. Because when you talk about that study they did with driving and not noticing different stuff on the road, like that totally makes sense because your brain's always trying to be as efficient as possible, right? So the more familiarity you have with something, the more your brain thinks there's no point in paying attention because I already know it's there, right? It'd be like a waste of energy.
Yeah, they said it was like an efficiency thing.
Yeah, yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think that if you're only doing white noising and that's the extent of your exposure to the language, I could totally see that happening. And some people have proposed this idea of like, well, I'm going to start studying this language a year from now. So how about for our first year, I'm not going to do anything, but I'll just keep it on in the background all the time, and maybe I'll get some kind of like free listening benefits, and like I'll start acquiring the sound system. And then a year from now, when I start actually studying, then I'll have a head start. Like I think in that case, it could actually actively be counterproductive because you'll just train your brain to ignore this odd sound that doesn't mean anything to you, right? But I think that probably that would not happen if you have periods where you're doing full on active immersion, you have periods where you're doing like actual passive where you're going in and out, and then you also have some periods of like white noising. I think like your brain will learn to register the language as like, oh, this is a really relevant thing that in fact I need to pay attention to because I don't understand well enough yet, right? Like I think there definitely is a mode in your brain where your brain is like, I'm actively acquiring this language. Like there's so much that I need to learn from it. I'm not there yet. Because I've also heard studies, at first this is what maybe I thought you were referencing, but let's say the opposite stuff. If there's research on implicit learning, implicit statistical learning that happens when people are not paying attention. There's like research where they will like have people do some kind of quiz or something, and they will like sneak in patterns into the quiz that people don't even know are there, and like they're not relevant to the quiz at all. They're just like arbitrary associations, but afterwards they can like test people and see that they've like picked up on these patterns unconsciously, even though they were like totally trying to like ignore them. That's an argument for maybe it is more valuable to do like totally background immersion, because there's some studies showing that actually our brain can pick up things that are in our environment even if we are ignoring them on a purely like unconscious level. But I think either can happen. It probably depends on your relationship to the language, right? Like I think if you're putting in lots of effort to acquire this language and you're very motivated to, then it's more likely that your brain will pick some stuff up even when it's passive. Whereas if all you do is passive, it's probably likely your brain will just realize, oh, this is just it's a waste of time to pay any energy to these noise in the environment, and it will just adapt to ignoring it.
Yeah, I think that the difference there might be their results are more narrow, that it has to be something totally irrelevant to you that's not important at all, and you have to see it all the time, and then your
Mm-hmm.
brain like reinforces a blind spot for it. So yeah, it's actually exactly what I was thinking, the example of listen to a language with 0% comprehension and no intention. I'm not even learning it yet. I'm just, pre-listening to it. They might be training their brain. This language is just useless noise. No, may as
Yeah,
well think about
yeah.
something else. My takeaway from that was like I was trying not to listen to things and just 0% listen. I would try and always like go in and out or kind of hold an attention to pay. But do you think maybe that's not something to worry about if you're already learning it and it's important to you that to understand it?
Yeah, like I mean, my intuition in like how I treat my Chinese is kind of like I think of it as like imagine you're like on a bicycle, and whenever you're like actively engaged with it, you're pedaling. And so even that counts even the parts of passive immersion when you are kind of tuned in, because in passive immersion you're like tuning in, tuning out and stuff like that. And so all those moments where you are tuning in, whether it's like active or passive, you're pedaling. And then when you're tuning out, that's kind of like you're just coasting. And so if you've been pedaling for the last week or realistically month, then even when you stop pedaling, you're still going to keep coasting, right? You're not going to immediately come to like a halt. And so that coasting is going to be your brain like unconsciously still picking up on some patterns and stuff like that, because you have this momentum of trying to acquire the language. Eventually, when you're coasting, you'll slowly slow down, and then you'll come to a halt. And then at that point, probably that's when slowly it would start moving in the opposite direction of instead of getting subtle gains from white noising, it might actually be building up a blind spot that will hinder you. So yeah, because I spend enough time paying attention to Chinese, my sense is that even when I'm ignoring it, it's actually helping me still a little bit. Especially because like when you actually do it, you know how sometimes you'll just have a random like you'll be totally ignoring it, but you'll just kind of like randomly have a moment where something like pops into your consciousness, which kind of tells me like, okay, some part of my brain is still processing it, even though I know like probably only a very small amount of resources are getting allocated to it.
I mean, maybe that happens with some people who, with the blind spot, with if they just watch anime with anime subs, they have no interest in learning Japanese.
Yeah, actually, 'cause I think the other thing here is that like what really matters is your psychology, like your brain's orientation towards the language. And I think there's actually a lot of individual difference there. And it makes it look like it shows up as like, oh, everyone learns languages differently type of thing. When in reality, it's more like the actual language learning mechanisms are the same, but it depends on your psychology. So like, for example, even if you take that case of somebody is like, I'm going to learn a language in a year, and so I'm just going to white noise audio, completely incomprehensible audio, and actively ignore it the whole time. Like, if that's a language that you're passionate about, right? And you're like, well, one day I really want to become able to understand Japanese. I love the sound of Japanese. Like, probably there's a good chance that your brain will actually be tuning in even unconsciously, and it'll be picking more things up. For some people, like that will just be their orientation, is like they'll have enough interest towards the language, it will be novel enough to them and attractive enough that even when they're white noising it, they'll be picking stuff up. Whereas for other people, it will really just be like completely filtered out, and it will completely become a white spot or a blind spot. I think that that's going to be individual difference. And I think it's the same thing with watching anime with subtitles, where like some people, when they watch anime with subtitles, they just completely filter out the Japanese. And it's really like they might as well be watching it with the sound off from a language learning perspective. Whereas other people, naturally, their brain pays more attention to it, and it becomes more like just doing primed listening. And that's why the amount of Japanese people acquire from watching anime with English subs, I've noticed a huge difference. There's people that have watched over 10,000 hours of subbed anime, and they seem to have acquired almost nothing. And then there's other people that essentially got fluent doing that. And then most people are somewhere in between, where they feel like there's certain grammar things or a lot of words that they mostly acquired, and when they started really learning the language, they had this big boost. So yeah, I think the fundamental mechanism is the same. It's like, how much is your brain tuning in? But depending on your natural orientation, how interested you are in the language and things like that, that's going to be different from person to person.
I feel like your belief as well has a huge factor on it. Like if you think that you can understand it, I feel like it's a huge multiplier. Yeah. Like for me, I think it's more beneficial to have like crazy confidence, like, yeah, I'm sick at Japanese, even though I suck. I think it puts a lot of like wind in your sails.
I mean, that's totally what I did when I was learning Japanese. I totally was delusional about my ability, but I think ultimately it was a good thing. Like, it actually helped me to have that. Plus, I mean, also there's even the more literal sense of like, why would you try to understand it if you thought that you're not going to be able to? Whereas if you're like, yeah, I can understand it, then you're actually going to try to understand it and then pay attention to it. So it just affects how much attention you're going to pay to it too.
Right. Like your brain will give up before it even tries if you don't believe that you can understand it.
Like, to me, defining the optimal state of mind while immersing, like, it could be the most important thing, at least to me. I know that there's already a video about this in the advanced theory section of the school community here. I'm just pointing this out. Like, to me, it's like super important to get this right and to define this like accurately and precisely, because I always question whether I'm actually making a good use of my attention while immersing, and so I don't want to end up with like bad results.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times when we talk about paying attention, implicitly, just due to the way that the English language works, it kind of sounds like we're talking about like you're actively putting effort into the act of paying attention. But that's not necessarily what I mean. In fact, it's almost actively not what I mean. Paying attention a lot of times is a completely passive activity in itself, right? Like, for example, if you're just sitting and watching a show on Netflix and you're super into the show, you're naturally paying a lot of attention to it, but it's not taking any conscious effort to pay that attention. It's just the natural result of you being interested in something. And so when I say paying attention, that's more of what I view as the ideal. Because if you're doing that thing where you're like consciously trying to direct your attention, notice things, that becomes a very system 2 like activity. And that's not really what we want as much, right? And so the ideal is that you find something that's engaging to you and comprehensible enough to you that the natural result of it being on in your environment is that you end up paying attention to it, right? Like, imagine a time in like English when you got so into watching a show that you like binge watched the whole thing, basically, right? Like, if you've ever had the experience of like you were something so good you like cleared your schedule so that you could binge watch the rest of it, whatever state of mind you are in then, that is like the holy grail of how you want to be paying attention. You were completely engaged, but it was completely effortless. And you were honed in on the meaning and the story, You weren't thinking about the words or the grammar or anything, right? And again, you're not necessarily going to, probably most of the time you won't be able to be in that state, but that should be your kind of like North Star that if you're ever kind of like lost and don't know what to do, like that should be where you should be heading to. Effortlessly, totally engaged on the meaning.